And we're back, and it's COMP1002, Web and Internet Fundamentals, Week 2, Lesson 2, Part 2, right? 222. We just came off talking about some the structure and semantics of HTML, and even the structure of my web project right now, which is just an index.html file and a README file for GitHub. I've got a couple of folders that I'm using that are empty right now, and I've got my some HTML that describes my page, my links to the top of my page, within a header and a navigation section. And again, this is all just layered in. One container that's inside of another container. And if you think about this, I'm able to control, more fine-grained control when I layer containers on top of each other. We're going to talk about this in more detail now. So again, I'm going to invite you to take a look at the information that I've got in our course pack, right? But I'm going to go into Lesson 2, which is Part 1. And there's about 40 slides in this one, which I expect we're going to get through fairly fast. Some of them are non-essential, but they just tell you some stuff. So I'm going to skim by. If I've talked about it already, I'm going to just jump through it. But you can certainly use this as something you can look to. I love when it does this stuff when I'm in the middle of my presentation. You can certainly jump through this. So we're going to talk about what we've already talked about already. H1 to H6 tags, applying a class or ID to elements. We've done that already. We haven't really applied the title attribute to elements. We're going to talk about a little bit of ARIA, right, which is accessibility guidelines for people who require screen readers, and to make your website more accessible, which is actually, from a Government of Ontario perspective, required if you're working on a government site. And it's not bad for you to do it either. All it does is it allows other visitors to consume your content that don't have the capability to view your content as well as you do. Maybe they have people with site problems and so on. Okay. And we're also going to talk about how to add comments to your code. I kind of talked about that last week, but we're going to talk about it a little bit again today. Right, so just make this a little smaller for you guys to see. There we go. So again, we talked about the main elements of your page, your doc type, your HTML, the head, the body of your document, your meta tags, and so on. I'm not going to skip that. And how to start your HTML pages here in a nutshell, how to kind of put that together in 9 steps. I'm not going to talk about that too much, but it's there for your reference. The difference between head and body, and how the doc type is like what it says here, a preamble. This comes right out of the book. And in the head of your document, you have the title of your page, which appears, by the way, up here, right? Not inside the content of your page, but way up here, right? And it describes your page, and it's really good for search engines. Title is a very important tag if you in the head of your document, because search engines look for the titles of your pages when it comes for them to bring it up as one of your results. Let's say you have a company, example.com is your company, and you want to have certain pages. One of them is your main index, your home page. Probably want to say, ABC or example.com homepage in your title. And the reason for that is when you look for example.com, if that was your domain, it would come up with that information and a summary of what this page is all about. Okay. So from a search engine perspective, it's good to put valid information in your title tag. Okay. And then we get into the body of your document, which includes the content. It talks about how to create a title. I'm not going to go into that. We kind of know how to do that right now, and how to do it in 2 steps, as well as how to create headings and what their semantic value is. And if you notice here on the right there's some examples of 2 heading tags, and they're both H2 tags underneath an H1 tag. So here's your H1 tag is the higher hierarchy. It goes like H1 first, larger text, lower it goes to H2, and so on, all the way to H6. And it describes different pieces of your page semantically as sections that are lower or subsections of other sections. Just your heading alone. And how to do that in a couple steps I also told you, and what the importance of headings is. Search engine optimization, headings are really important. You make sure that you get those right, and you use the proper headings. Some people, for whatever reason, they don't do things in order. They think they can use headings to style their page. So they use an H1 tag, big heading. They're like, that's too big. I'm going to start my page with an H3. Bad. Smaller, right? because you're using your the browser styles to change the size of your font, but that's not semantically correct. H1 should be the first thing on your page. That's the right way to do it. And if we want to make that H1 tag smaller, right, we can target that with CSS, our rules for styling, which we're going to learn later on. That allows us to change the way that looks. We don't use tags to go around our styling rules. Okay, that's bad form. And again, how to organize your web page with headings. It talks about that. A little bit, I've kind of talked about that. Here's an example page, and here's some common constructs that we talked about. Your article. There's also something, we described kind of a sidebar. How do we do a sidebar like this? If you look at this little kind of zoomed in or zoomed out page, right? You've got a headline tag here at the top, and way at the top you have a masthead with a bit of navigation here at the top, if you notice, right? And then some content, and then on the side you've got a sidebar with some additional navigation and links and maybe some information, right? Now you can't do this sidebar without CSS. So if you're trying to do this kind of thing without CSS, it won't work. Don't worry, we're not into that yet, right? I'm showing you basic page structure right now. So as we get closer and closer to using our CSS, once we've absorbed the HTML piece, right, and we talked about that a little bit, you'll be okay to get into the styling aspect, right? Here's a default page structure. Again, masthead with navigation on the top, all right? And again, when I say common, sometimes we move away from this structure because we want to get a little bit more fancy or you look unique, right? And that's okay, but this is very common. You might see something like this, where you have some kind of masthead or header with navigation. And think about the glossary of terms here. And when we do a little bit of a test, I'm going to test you on stuff like, what's a masthead, right? What is he talking about? It's a header, but it's the header of the page, typically, where we have images, your logo, primary navigation, all that stuff's in the header of, we call that a masthead, right? Same thing with your main page content, and then you might have some related content to the side, right? And on the side, that's related to our page content, right? Sometimes we have images there, sometimes we have advertising there. There's different reasons why we have that aside. And then there's some kind of footer information, right, that describes the page content above or supports it in some way. Terms of use, like I said, privacy policy, that kind of thing, copyright statements, other links to take us to other pages, contact information, because you always want it on every page, other things, sometimes social media, links to Facebook and LinkedIn, Twitter, if you're into that, or whatever it's going to be, stuff at the bottom. All right. By the way, let me skip back to that. So what is this thing I'm showing you? This is almost like a little a wireframe, right? A wireframe with a little bit of descriptive text to tell us what each section does. And a lot of times what we do, and I kind of went into that a little bit before, which is we describe our content a little bit before we do any kind of coding by doing a little bit of a picture like this. In the old days, right? I used to take my team with me and I'd say, you're my team, right? You and I go to a client, and you're the designer and I'm the developer. That's how it used to be, right? And the designer would take out a little piece of paper and sketch out this thing, right? Sketch it out, right, by hand. Say, what do you think of this? Oh, you don't like that? What do you think of this? You can sketch out some other designs. Well, you don't like that? Let's sketch this out. Then you would talk to the client, get some requirements, go back to the office, right, where he does all the work, right? And now from his little sketches, we put together our design, right? It's not exactly like that anymore. We use a lot of digital tools these days, but more or less we gather requirements from the client, right? That's what we do. We draw it out, we wireframe it like this, right? Then we present it to the client again saying, are you sure? Let's get some approval here. Is this what we want? And if they say yes, we go into the coding phase, right? We don't do stuff without approval because we want to reduce the back and forth between you and the client. Like how many times have you gone to somebody, let's say, have you ever done any work for a family person, some kind of family, and they go, no, I don't like it. No, I don't like it. Can you do this? Can you change this? I like what you're doing. Can we add this? Can we add that? Can we add this? I always call this the case of the might as wells. Right? Who's ever done construction in their house or been part of that? Yeah, you've done some construction, right? You ever tear down a wall or been part of that? Here's what when I talk to my construction friends, you do this, eh? You tear down this wall over here, right? This wall gets torn down, and it opens up a can of worms, right? You see some ventilation in there. You might see some electrical, some other things, plumbing, right? And then if you have a lot of money, you sit there and go, man, I got some old plumbing in here. Right? I got some old electrical. I got some old ventilation. You know what? My wall is open. I might as well do this other work, right? And so a project that might have cost you $10,000 now costs you $50,000, right? Because I got to change my HVAC. I got to change my electrical, right? I got to change my, everything else that I want to put in there. Maybe I want to change this, what the wall looks like or whatever, because I've opened it up. I might as well, right? That's what the clients do to you. Hey, you're building the page. You might as well add this content to. Might as well redesign my logo. You might as well fill it in, for yourself, right? That's called scope creep, guys and girls, right? You don't want that to happen. You want to control your project. So there is no might as well. So you go to the client, they give you the requirements, and you do for that phase whatever they tell you to do, nothing more and nothing less. If you might have a change management process where they say, you know what, I thought about adding this in. I know it's not part of our plan. The client comes to me and says this. I'm not going to say no, but I'm going to tell them this. I'm going to say, yes, Mr. Customer, I totally can do that for you, but I cannot meet my previous requirement, to deliver on this particular date. I have to move your date out. Is that okay? Sometimes they balk at that. And by the way, it's going to cost you this much more money, right? Because I have to put this many more hours into play, right? You mean you can't do it for free? No, right? In fact, here's a note on that, right? If you're working for your brother's, sister's, cousin's, uncle's dog, whatever, right? And they ask you to do something for free. Do you say yes as a designer developer because you're their friend, family member, whatever? The answer is absolutely not. Here's a question. If you have a construction person and you ask them to bring their cranes and construction equipment to dig your ground, right? They own a construction company. They're going to do it for free for you? No way. Not going to happen, right? And this is your area of expertise. Don't belittle yourself. Don't demean yourself by saying, I'm worth nothing. Because if it's free, you're worth nothing, all right? Don't do that. Say to yourself, you know what? This is how much I charge. On that, how much do you charge per page, or do you charge per project? How do you charge that? Typically what we do in the industry is I size it out for myself. I come up with a proposal document, okay? So I have a set of requirements. I go to the customer, I meet with them, I draw some stuff out, we try and get as much requirements from the customer as possible. We draw up a proposal document, we do an estimate of how long it's going to take us to do, figure out profit, figure out costs, figure out time frame, come to the customer and say, we can do it by this date, give or take a day or so from a deployment perspective, right? It's going to cost you this much, and I'm going to take payments here, 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 and here, right? That's how it's going to be done. Very, very organized, right? And I'm going to do that based on my rate of pay. So let's say, for example, I have students that work for me, and I pay them $20 an hour or $15 an hour, and they're working on this piece. I add up all those hours. If a project takes 100 hours to do, there we go, there's the cost. Don't get into the habit, and I really warn against this, even as a junior developer, to say, yeah, I can do it for $500. That's just like shooting yourself in the foot or in the head, right? Because it may not be good. You might be working like a lot of hours for somebody that you think you can do, especially when you underestimate stuff, right? Because we're terrible at estimation. It's going to cost you more money than they're paying you, and a lot of headache. And then you got to think about support too. How are you going to support this person afterwards? So the moral of the story is, no might as wells. Don't do things for free. Make sure you estimate things tight. And you can't do that without making some mistakes, right? So that's why it's really good to work with somebody else that knows what they're doing. But it's okay if you're a new developer. If you want to try this on your own, there's nothing wrong with trial and error. You know what? The best things we've learned in life are through falling down, right? So fall down a little bit. It's okay. Just be aware that it's probably going to cost you a little bit. And that's okay. It's the kind of lessons of life, right? Here's another one. Hey, Tom, it took me 5 minutes to build this WordPress site. So should I just charge, $100? Absolutely not. Can they build a WordPress site? Can they put it up on the web? Can they style it for you? No? Well, if they could, then they would do it. They wouldn't hire you. Don't charge $100. Charge $1,500 for a website that's a WordPress site at the very minimum, especially if it's a 5-page site, right? Why? I'm not trying to be greedy or anything like that. And what about, well, they said I can get a Wix site or some kind of really quick site. Let them go. Let them do the Wix site. Let them do whatever they want. Because those people who say, well, I can do it for cheaper, are going to be a pain in the ass to collect money from. And you don't want that pain in the ass. Choose your clients. I know it's hard in the beginning because you want to make money, right? When you're young developers, you got to say no, right? Because at the end of the day, it's going to cost you money, right? You don't want to go in more debt because of what you're doing for the person, right? You want to make money. And the way to make money is to be efficient, to cost out everything, and estimate your time. Okay. Again, a little bit of an aside there. Okay. So again, we talked about this as a part of our process, and now we're creating a header. Again, we talked about the header, and if you notice here, there's a little bit of a role. Here's a role, right? And in it's an attribute in the header that shows banner, right? Why do I do that role thing? Well, that's an ARIA thing. That's a when I say ARIA, it's ARIA, ARIA. What it means is it's a something for screen readers. And what the screen readers do is for people who have trouble seeing your page, they go through and it reads the page to them. And this role attribute, the landing role is what it's called, right, is going to sound out to screen readers what this thing is. It's a banner, and inside the banner there's a nav, and inside the banner, now they can't see navigation, right? They don't care about navigation. They want to skip to your content, right? So we're going to talk about accessibility guidelines later on in the course and how we want to produce a skip to content link for people who need screen readers, because they don't care about your navigation, no matter how beautiful it is. You can't see it. Okay. Okay, so that's creating a header. That's pretty straightforward. And it tells you, to create a header, you put content in between the header tags. And again, a header, you can layer stuff inside of that. You can put your header, inside your header you put your nav, inside your nav you put your unordered list, because that's how we do our navigation typically. And it kind of looks like this, like we kind of did in our example when we used brackets, right? So here's our brackets, here's our header, here's our nav, and your unordered list, right, is another container. And it describes almost like a bulleted list. That's what an unordered list is, right? So that's a new tag you're learning about. If I was to change this to an OL, ordered list, let's do that for a second to see the difference. An ordered list then, if I was to change this and update my web page, right? Somewhere in Chrome, there it is. It's an ordered list with numbers, right? Like a numbered list, right? So that's what an ordered list is compared to an unordered list. This is great for a list if you're listing stuff down. 1, do this. 2, do this, like a recipe. 3, do that, or instructions. That's great. Or 5 items. These are the 5 items. Not great for navigation because we get rid of these numbers in navigation with CSS, with styling. We get rid of the numbers and the bullets, and we reorganize our lists into a different. They look differently. We don't see that it's a list. Actually, it looks like plain old hyperlinks or buttons, if you will, right? So that's what this does from a list perspective, right? So that's why we use an unordered list. Unordered list is bullets, and with CSS we get rid of the bullets and we reorganize our list items so that they sit next to each other for a horizontal list, a horizontal navigation, or sit on top of each other in a vertical navigation, and we use CSS to detect mouse over events and different things like that to produce that navigation type look. Okay, but this is pretty much the same way. The only thing that I would do differently here, if I was going to redo this unordered list with you, is put in some kind of hashtag in here. So follow me here if you're going to modify your file at the very minimum, so it doesn't go anywhere. The hashtag means don't go anywhere, right? Here inside the middle where the hashtag is, think about this as a placeholder where I would put my link, my actual link text. So for example, it would be if my first link, my link 1 is my home page, then, right? Let's just change link 1 to home, right? Right? And usually, like, I like to say this, I'm going to talk about the 5-page site, which is very common. What's the 5-page site? I'm going to test you on this, guys, so listen up, right? Home, right? Products, services, about us, contact us. 5 pages you see almost on every site. If you don't see those pages in some form or another, instead of products, it's projects. Instead of services, it's something else, right? 5 pages typically, it's like a little business card online. People will ask you to do this. 5-page site, right? So let's do this. So here's my home, and you put a link to the home, and my link 2 would be a products link. I sell some products, or I have some projects I want to show you, or a gallery, or something like that. I have some services that I offer you. What services am I selling, right? I have an about us, or my team, or something like that, right? And it's just this is the link text. This is not the actual link itself. And then at the bottom here, I have a contact us page. Here's my contact us, right? So home, product, services, about us, contact us. And then the links then, if we had extra pages, pages that I would link to from this navigation, right? They would be the links to the pages. So here would be a link to my home page, index.html, right? This would be a link to my products.html, my service.html, my about.html, my contact.html. You put all those links in here. And guess what I'm going to do? Each of my pages is going to have this copied over and over again. So each of my pages is going to have the same nav, typically, right? The same text, in fact, if anything, is going to be put in there. If anything, what I might do is tag up my, my page, right, my links. I might put a class here. Take a look at this. I can add a class attribute into the list item, right, itself. So I put class for my list item. This list item is going to have a class of active, right? And why would I put that? Because I can target all active, any element with an active class, right? That has an active class as an attribute, right? And I can make it so that the color is different for that element. So my home page, my home attribute looks a little darker than my other links, let's say, as an example. I can't do that right now because I'm not using CSS. But that's what I would do. I would use some kind of active element or something else to target that particular list item, right? Again, don't worry if you don't get it yet, right? It's not important. I want you just to see the structure and absorb it. The more you see this stuff, the more we talk about it, the more we talk this language, the easier it's going to be for you to absorb it, okay? So let's see what the difference is in my page now, right? Because I've changed what it says, home, products, services, about us, and contact us, like a little nav, right? But again, imagine this without the bullets, and imagine these things in a vertical format. I can't do that right now, or horizontal. I can't do that right now because I have no CSS. Okay. Let's go back to this. So that's what I've done here. When it comes to navigation, my navigation also has this role, this landing role, if you notice. Here it is, this ARIA role, so that screen readers know it's navigation. And a lot of screen readers will skip over navigation and go to the content, right? And that's what we do. We do two tags. This is a role that says what this particular container does, so that so people with accessibility issues can see that. All right, and then it talks about here how to set up a nav. The nav tag is a new tag we've talked about today. And we also talked about an unordered list with list items underneath them. Or you can use an ordered list. I should probably tag this a little differently. I always forget to do this kind of stuff in my PowerPoints, but hey, what the hell. An ordered list, you can use one of the two, but I don't recommend an ordered list. I highly recommend an unordered list for all your for all your navigation. So that way, you know, it's a bulleted list that we can get rid of, because an ordered list in this particular main, because, you know, there's some part of the page that's the main content, right? And in the past, we used to use a generic div tag with a class of main content, like I showed you before. We don't want to do that. The main tag that's part of HTML5, it's better to use that from a semantics perspective, so we understand what that means. So I'd rather use that than div class is equal. So if I was going to test you on this and I say, can you use main more than once in a page, right? You could, by the way, but would it be semantically correct is the better question. True or false? The answer would be false. If it's not semantically correct to use main more than once in a page. You can use main on different pages, right? But for each document, it can only have one main semantically. Okay. All right. Creating an article. What does it look like? Here's a great example of this on the side. You have a heading as an example inside your article, and then you have some paragraph information inside there, maybe another heading, and you might have several headings inside the same article, or you might only have one. All right. But the idea is that the article is the container that surrounds this main article that you're talking about. Articles can be as short or as long as makes sense and in the right context for your page. right? So there's no recommended length. It doesn't say like you have to have 30 words in your article. No, no, no. Whatever you want, whatever makes sense for the page. But the article a container, replaces the generic div tag again if you're writing something to do with the content of your page, article. And again, from a very perspective, I'm just going to skip over these to create an article, to create pages. Just 1 second while I close the door. It seems like that's a main thoroughfare for some reason or another. It's just like lots of people walking through and I can't even hear myself. Okay. Luckily, we have good air conditioning in here. Okay, so defining a section then. That's one thing we didn't cover. What's the difference between a section and an article? Sometimes, we want to use a section, and again, it's a generic section. I like intercutting between divs and sections. If I want to use a div tag, for me, div and section mean pretty much the same thing. There is no distinction. They're semantically meaningless in some ways, right? Even though section is the new term. I sometimes have layers, if you will, of containers within containers within containers, just to promote control. So I want to control this piece, this box inside of the other box, right? And sometimes what we used to do in the past is use div, 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 like we're in div hell. So a great way to do that is to break it up with containers, with sections. So you go div section, div section, div section. So that way you know one section is inside of a div and so on, and it's easier for you to find and identify the end tags. Because sometimes that's where we get a little bit of some mistakes. But at the end of the day, think about this as that divides certain things that they've grouped together. For example, this breaking news could be a section, and the section itself could be this main article. This whole thing could be an article. Here's the main, and again with the role of main. Again, this role attribute is for screen readers. Actually, does help with SEO as well. So if you want to improve your search engine optimization, remember what Google is looking for these days is HTTPS instead of HTTP. If you're using a non-secure site, you score lower than if you're using a secure site. In fact, in the future, there won't be any more HTTP because they're so insecure, right? So, I mean, again, we're talking about future. So everyone's going to have an SSL certificate eventually, and when you create a site, so they score higher. So SSL certificates, sites with SSL or secure certificates that encrypt the site itself and the information, they score higher. Sites with Semantic HTML score higher. Sites with ARIA roles score higher because they're more organic and they're more available to everybody. If you do things right, you can score much higher in the search results without paying anybody anything. All right. If you do things wrong, like you use Flash or something crazy like that, right, which is old technology nowadays, right, then you're not going to score high at all. In fact, you may not score at all, right? So you may not come up in the search, at least not on the first page, which is bad, right? When you build a site for a customer, the first thing they're going to say is, well, can people find me on the web? Like if someone has to search for their name specifically, that's kind of the lowest level. Anyone can search for a name and it'll come up, right? But if they don't know, if I'm selling, I don't know, chemical products for cleaning or whatever, and I say cleaning products Barry, right? And my customer doesn't come up high on the list. Something I may have done something wrong, or there's something I need to do with my Google Analytics and so on, and other organic links to increase my results. And the way to do that, of course, is there's a couple ways to do that. One, pay for a search engine optimization company to do it for you. I highly recommend it. Example, a local company here in Barrie, G-Shift. They're really, really good at doing that. That's what they focus on. That's their primary thing, right? And I totally encourage that. And some companies, all they do is web design and web application development, but they don't do SEO. And that's a smart thing to do because SEO is a whole other business in doing that kind of thing. If you want to do it yourself, though, and you can't pay for that, or your client doesn't want to pay for it, that's okay. You can certainly do things by linking stuff together. Like, for example, a lot of social links. If you have a YouTube site, point to your site. If you have or your site points to the YouTube site, back and forth. It's kind of like this double linking role, right? You have a LinkedIn site. If you have a LinkedIn page. You have a Facebook page, if that makes sense. You have a Twitter page. You have other pages that link into your site, and there's organic links that point back to your original page. That increases your results as well. So that's another thing you can do for SEO. Okay, So again, sections are just generic, and we use them to intercut between divs and as a generic tag, and so on. How about the aside tag? The aside, we can't really do an aside, even if I do it on my page right now. So here, I've got this information, and I've got my main article, and I've got my main content, which ends just down here. And before my horizontal rule here, I'm going to put an aside, right? There's an aside. Let's try to do this. And inside my aside, I want to put an H1 tag, you know, as an example with, you know, current information, whatever the information is that makes sense on the aside. And maybe with some kind of bulleted list of information, right? So maybe another unordered list with some list items. I'm going to do the long way now. So a list item, right? And if I look at it inside my list item, I have an anchor tag, right? Let me just do this for a second, so you can see what I'm talking about. I have an anchor tag, right? And if you notice, when I press my anchor tag, I get this href, which is my link. That's the actual link itself. And then I need link text, like, you know, first link, you know, as an example. And then I can always kind of tighten this up a little bit. If I was going to do it by hand, let's tighten this up a little bit. So I put my link tag all in one level, all in one row. So there's my first link or my first list item, right? And then I want to copy and paste, right? So I want to copy. It's the long way to do it. Paste, paste. Let's say a few links. And this is the second link. This is the third link. You see where I'm going, right? And then maybe over here, I've got some, you know, other kind of, I got some link information, which we haven't gone over yet. And this is my aside. Maybe I even have a little bit of a paragraph text. Inside my paragraph text, I'm going to put some lorem 10, right? Some text in there, right? And then when I see what it looks like from a web page perspective, it doesn't look any different for us right now. And the reason for that is because we need CSS for us to do that. So here's our heading, our first heading, second heading, current information, and finally with this current information stuff. And what, by the way, here's a mistake I made. The headline tag is too big. I probably want to use a smaller, like a heading 3 as an example. That makes sense because it's a subheading, if you will. It's not a main heading, so I wouldn't use a heading 1 there, right? Heading 2 or heading 3 is okay, right? Sometimes people use smaller headings as well, depending on how many of these asides. They might have a grouping of asides that they put in. But think about this as a sidebar. Sidebar navigation, sidebar information, something you want to say about your content, right? And that's what that's used for. Again, can't do anything from a structure perspective right now. There it is, it's a little better. But because we don't have CSS, but we can see how this plays out. It goes in order, the order that I've written it here. But on the aside, if I go back to the PowerPoint presentation, it's going to appear over here, right? This is where it's going to appear. When we use CSS, there's going to be some information here on the aside that relates to, or it's tangential to whatever my article is saying. Okay, that's the aside. And it talks about how to put the aside together and so on here. Of course, the footer is another construct, right? It's another structure. And again, we put some information like copyright information, something to do with the page itself. A note, though, I should mention that headers and footers don't have to just apply to the page content itself, but you can also use headers and footers for articles, right? So you can have the header of an article, the footer of the article. And a lot of times, structurally, like there's a question that came from the team in the corner there that said, hey, I think Kayla, is that you? You're the one that said about, hey, what about this footer and header thing? It's asking me for a footer and header for my article, right? Yeah. And semantically, it's correct. They're asking for you. You can put a header and footer in your article because it's the right thing to do. And you can actually, from a structure perspective, readability-wise, and you might see them in other places as well. So here's a question on a test. Can you use a header, or should you use a header only in just the top and bottom of your page? And the answer is no, you shouldn't, or false. It's not true. You don't need to do that. It can be used in other contexts as well. It's most common to be used as the top and bottom of your page, but it doesn't have to be that way. And sometimes it makes sense not to. We talked about generic containers at length. I'm not going to go into that. Really, we're talking about the div tag here and how it used to be the main tag that we used to use in our in the way we program the web. We use them still, but we make sure that it makes sense when we use them. And we use them as a wrapper, a content wrapper, or if we want to affect whole contents of or parts of our pages with some kind of styling that it doesn't make any sense to use some kind of other semantic tag, right? So if it doesn't make sense to use, if it's a section or a div tag, it's usually some kind of generic effect that I want that's going to affect large portions of my page, all right? Or I want some kind of special effects. And here's another example web page layout where you have your header, and this is using Semantic HTML with your page header information. You have your main content tag, and this whole element is made up of the tag itself plus the content. And by the way, the article is considered the content as well. And so you can see that the article tags here, or the article element, is nested inside of the main tag, right? The main element. Right, here's your boxes here. And what it's saying is this article is inside the main content. This is the first article. This is the second article. And you might have some information in this article like heading tags, paragraph tags, images, all kinds of other stuff that are inside your article. Right? Again, for your aside, you might have this generic, here's your generic wrapper here, this div with a class of sidebar to kind of identify what this is, because there is no sidebar semantic HTML tag. So we're using the old way now. We're just identifying what this sidebar is, right? And a lot of times we do this from a styling perspective, so we can kind of make this two-column layout, right? And if you notice here, I have two asides, one that's related to this article and the other one that's related to this article inside of my sidebar. And then on the bottom, I have my generic footer that applies to the whole page. So again, a typical layout or an example of a possible layout for you. If I was going to go to the customer, I might want to sketch something like this out. Say, is this how you want your landing page to look like? Okay. We talked about ARIA, which is this, and again, the proper name is the ARIA, which is Web Accessibility Initiatives, Accessible Rich Internet Applications, or just ARIA, right? That's what I like to kind of say. And again, like it says here, it fills semantic gaps when it comes to to visitors that require screen readers or have trouble viewing your page, and not because of your web browser, but because they have trouble seeing things. Okay, and again, the use of landmark roles. Now, we kind of been using that the whole time, and if you notice, there's an example here of some typical landmark roles that you can use in your page. So, for example, the role of banner, right, or masthead, right? So if I go back to my brackets right here, and I have this header, here's my header, I could certainly assign this a role tag. Here's my role, and if I go equals to, you can see that there are some enumerations here that it recommends, and one of them would be banner. So I can kind of put that in, and that helps us from a screen reader's perspective, accessibility view. And same thing with nav, we have a role of navigation, right? And so let me put that in quotations, that would be nice. And then the same thing goes with our main article, right? So role, right? What's our main article look like? Can I put main? Yeah, right? A role of main, right? And the same thing goes with my my footer, right? I can have a role of, and this is interesting, content info. Because a lot of times what happens is my footer is some info about my content, right? Not a footer necessarily. All right, so that's very common stuff. These are common ARIA landing roles, right? And what they do is basically they describe stuff to screen readers. Hey, there's a problem that I have here. See this red mark? It says that I should be an H3 tag. It'll still render into HTML, by the way. If you have the wrong tag, it'll just turn up as a red mark for you. Let's take a look. Did that make any difference to my page? These ARIA stuff, this ARIA stuff? No, because it's not visible to us. It's only visible, or you can only hear it with a screen reader, right? Okay. Let's go back to the PowerPoint for a second. We're getting there. We only have a few pages left. So again, landing roles. There's some examples. I've kind of put it in this format where you can see it's right from the book, right? It talks about different landing roles and what you can put in there. Oh, here's the role of complementary we can put in our side. Sorry, I forgot to do that. That's one thing I did forget. So here's, we have to find our aside. Here's our aside with the role of complementary, right? And that basically tells us that this section is a complementary section that complements our article, whatever it is, right? It kind of goes along with the article. All right, save that. Okay, and then again, this is an example with all the roles in place. The same exact layout with the roles in place. Will I test you on ARIA roles? I might ask you a question or two on your next test, and it's going to be very high level. Like, do I expect you to know everything about accessibility right now? No, we're probably going to go into it again a little more detail in future courses, but it's definitely something that's important if you want to be compliant, especially from a Government of Canada perspective, right? We want to kind of support accessibility and to increase visitors of all types, right, to your website. It helps you too. Again, we did this naming elements with a class or ID, and I talked about two things. That the ID has to be unique for that particular page. That's the way it goes. Whereas the class you can reuse over and over again, and you can use multiple classes here. Let me show you what this looks like, right? Here's a name and another name for the class, but you can add other classes, as many classes as you want in one line. And sometimes we put multiple classes, so we layer formatting and styles one on top of the other, right? And we do that because sometimes we want to be very specific with what that class does. As an example of that would be, I want to make this class take up anything that I apply this class to have a certain amount of space on my screen. Like, for example, 50% of my screen. So I might call my class with writing 50%. That's my class, right? So if I apply a 50% class to my container, it's going to take up a width of 50% of my screen. I can apply that to multiple containers because maybe I want them all to take 50% of my screen. I could also make a class that says right. I can name the class right, and what that means is I want it to be to the right of the 50%, but I also want it to be to the right of the screen. And then I have my CSS that moves this thing to the right and creates a two-column view, right? So I can have multiple class names inside my class attribute. I only can have one name inside my ID attribute. And with CSS and JavaScript, I can target both classes and ID tags, attributes. You can also add the title attribute to other elements, not just the title in your head. And again, what this does is it creates a little tooltip that hovers in your page. Like an example of this would be, my first heading. Let's try this out. So if I go here, and if I put a title inside my my first heading here, right? I can put it anywhere I want. So I put title. Notice it comes up, and then I put the same thing, first heading, right? What it does on the website, it produces a. If I hover over the title, right? So refresh here. Then for sometimes it depends on the page. See how it comes up with a little tooltip? If I hover over it, that's built into the browser. I didn't do anything for that. So the title tag can produce a tooltip, especially if you want to describe an image. As an example, you could put a little title in there for the image to describe what the image is, or if you want to describe something that you pop over because the user doesn't understand what that is, you can certainly use the title attribute to do that. It's not the same as the title in the head. The head has a specific title, and the title goes up here, right, in the top of your page. If you notice, even if I hover over here, I get a bit of a tooltip, right? Acts the same way, but it's for more clarification for us, but it also helps ARIA for accessibility. If you want to do a popover, that title comes across in the screen reader as additional information. Just like the alt tag comes across the screen reader because they can't see the picture, the alt tag for images describes the image, right? It's a little summary of what the image is about. Okay, so that's really what the title is, and we've kind of reached the end. One thing I should note is someone asked me earlier today is, how about comments? How do I add those little frilly comments, right? How do I do that? And I'm going to end the PowerPoint. But the way to do that is if I want to add comments to the page, for example, I want to say, well, here's my header section. I can do something like this, less than, exclamation mark, dash, dash, right? That's how I start my comments off in HTML. And I can do something like this, page header. That's not uncommon for us to do. I'm going to copy this. Now maybe I want to have another section over here. I break up my HTML so it's more readable again from a developer perspective. So this is main content. Right? And then I have another one that says, you know, your sidebar. Right? So when someone else looks at this, or if you haven't looked at your site for a while, right? It kind of reminds you of what all this stuff is, right? So you can kind of say, oh yeah, this is where I have my footer, or this is where I have this. And now in this particular case, it's so small, and it makes sense. We're just duplicating what it says here on the page, but in a much larger web page with a lot of information, a lot of content, comments like this, especially when you have different classes assigned to things, can really help. And an example of that would be if I have some kind of class here for my navigation. So not only do I have a role of navigation, but I have a class that's assigned to my navigation as an example of primary nav. Right, here's my primary nav. And sometimes you might see classes with this camel case. And sometimes you might see classes that are written like this. Both are correct. Use one. Okay, don't use both camel case and underscore. Use one pattern of class naming. Otherwise, it gets really hairy. You know, you look at it and you're like, so there's no consistency on this page at all, right? Whoever the author is just slap content together, right? So whatever you prefer. I prefer camel case. That's what makes sense to me, and that's why I use it, right? So if I have primary nav here as a class, sometimes what I like to do is at the bottom of my nav, put a little comment, inline comment that says, you know, primary nav, right? I know what this nav bar is, right? That's the end of my primary nav. Because sometimes what I have is a lot of different containers that's one on top of the other. Like for example, maybe I want to put this as this is my first article, and it's also content. So what I did, I copy this piece here, these two classes, right? Let's try this again. So I copy these two classes. See, look, I'm doing first article with an underscore. I'm breaking my own rule, right? And so I copied these two classes, sorry about that. And here on the bottom, right, under where the article is, where it ends, I kind of put it some kind of comments where I copy in the classes that I have associated with this particular article. And then I can do the same thing for my second article. So all I'm doing is adding in comments that are not going to be seen on the website, like physically they won't be seen, right? But they're good for us as developers to identify different sections, to tell us what they do, right? Especially from a functionality perspective. Sometimes we add functionality or target a specific section with style or classes, and it helps us do that. And remember what they're for, right? Now, the only time you can see them is if you go into your website, just to refresh here, and if I kind of do a view page source, right? You can see how they come across here on the website. And I did that by right-clicking view page source. And sometimes this is good. I do this a lot. If I want to see what the other person has done, like if I want to look at a web page and say, that's a hot page, man, how did he do that, right? What kind of stuff is he doing here? I right-click, I do a view source, and I see his code. You can see anybody's code pretty much. Some people stop that from happening too. There's ways of doing that. But for the most part, you can't stop it. You know, and you can look at somebody else's code, right? So again, an example of that would be, let's go to a site like Google, right? And in Google, I want to right-click, and I want to view page source. As an example, I can see the page source, but guess what they've done? They've minified my HTML here on the page, so it looks like gobbledygook. And they've also got a lot of JavaScript that's been minified here, right? So that it's unrecognizable. But it makes sense because when you have minified content, remember that as, the browser is going to go through the content and try and read one line at a time, right? We have spaces and we have additional longer content. It takes longer for the browser to load. And so minification is a technique we use to speed up web browsing or loading up a web page, right? Let's go to another one that does not as bad. Let's go to LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn.com, right? And if I right-click here and do view page source, again, you can see that they've got some script tags at the top of the page. And then on the bottom, everything's minified again, right? Very common technique, right? But there are some pages out there, especially pages with smaller companies, or even some big companies. Let's go to Apple. Right click, and I'm gonna right click. Wait, I'm gonna right click. I'm gonna right click. Ah, there it is. Lots of images, right? And my context menu doesn't know where to come up. Am I right clicking to save the image, or to view the page source? I don't know, right? So view page source. I can do that, and you can see now that there is a little bit more clarity about what this page source, what this page is doing, right? Again, for the person who's untrained, the people who want to pay you nothing for your web content, right? This looks like garbage, right? But for you, as we get closer, you're going to start identifying things like list items, right? Here's my list item for the iPad. Here's my anchor tag, right? That allows me to link to the iPad information. I also have some data analytics attributes that are data attributes that use JavaScript to give me some analytics on when people click on this stuff, and so on, right? So page source is something that we use a lot of times to take a look or inspect pages, right? And I also showed you the other time last week where you can right-click and click Inspect Element. And what Inspect Element does is it brings the developer tools alive for Chrome and other browsers, and you can actually look and inspect different elements of your page, right? Let's do that with our page. Here's our page. Let's inspect element. So I'm going to right-click and inspect element. And when I do that, I can actually look through my page structure here, right? Here's my body. And if I hover over, it actually hovers over the section that I'm doing, what I'm looking at, and gives me some information from a styles perspective on the right-hand side. And if you notice, there's no style associated to it. Here's my page content. I can hover over this. I'm just making it big so you can see it. It's highlighting different aspects of my page and telling you how big, how many, what's the size of my page and so on in terms of pixels currently, and what I'm actually targeting here. So again, comments, just to finish off this PowerPoint and finish off this little video, because I want to get into web publishing next, right? Comments allow us just to communicate what the page is doing to ourselves in the future, because you know what? You're going to do a web redesign, your web page redesign, your web project redesign today. You're going to leave it alone. It's going to be done. You're going to be happy with it. Your client's going to be happy, and then 6 months, a year later, you're going to come back, and you're like, what did I do here, right? If you don't keep notes, if you don't have a style guide, if you don't have documentation to see what you've done internally and externally, it's going to be more challenging to pick up where you left off and continue forward, even if you worked on it yourself, because you're probably going to work on other stuff if you're a web developer. You're never just going to work on one project. So that's all I want to say for this PowerPoint. It's just covering that one, or this video, just covering this one PowerPoint. So we'll take a pause, and then we'll go to the next one.